Okay, we're live on YouTube and ready to go. Thanks to those of you who've joined me here live in the Zoom room today for a special interactive discussion. Um, I know you've all seen the email probably, and that's why you're here. Those of you that have joined me live, those of you who are watching on the replay after the fact, thanks for joining and checking in on this. It's a little hard in the email to describe exactly what I was thinking, but back when we first started doing webinars in 2020, as the pandemic took hold and we started talking about, how to use Zoom to teach and all these kind of things, one of the first sessions we ever did was just to sit down and talk about the state of our teaching and what's changed and how we're coping with things. And I think it's long overdue to have another discussion like that. We did have one maybe in 2022 or so to check in. But I just wanted to check in with everyone and see, what's going on in your studios. What's the rate of change? What's the state of change? Is there any change? Is there no change? Are you being frustrated? Are you feeling really successful as a studio teacher? And it's long overdue to have that kind of chat, I think. I'm seeing some things change, from the CC desk. I'll share those with you today, and I'll be quite candid about some of that, as well as most of you know, I do have a private teaching studio as well, where I see, only a couple handfuls of students a week. And recently, I've been able to take on some beginners for the first time in a number of years since before the pandemic. I'd say maybe not so recently, I'd say in the last year and a half to 2 years. And I've been able to add a few more this year. And I'm definitely seeing changes in ways that I hadn't quite anticipated, or in ways that, I thought have already kind of taken place, but now there are further changes and I'm having to adjust my methods. So maybe what I'll do is I'll set the discussion here, and then I'm going to jump in, and we're on Zoom webinar. So those of you that are here with me live, a bunch of you, if you raise your hand as time goes on when you want to share, I'll let you unmute your microphone. Don't worry about your webcams. And let's just say this. We're streaming live on YouTube right now as well, and thanks to those of you who are watching the replay after the fact. But at some point, I sense it may be likely that we cut off the YouTube live stream and we just continue the discussion in-house. I'll make that call when the time comes, so that those of you watching the replay, you can get an idea of the discussion and what took place. But my feeling is that we may get into some topics that we don't want recorded live or out there for public display, and that's okay if that turns out to be the case. And there are a number of you watching the replay later and would like to have this kind of live discussion, let me know. And we can certainly do this again in a different way or a different manner that's maybe not so public. So I realize a lot of what we want to share sometimes we may not want out there for public discussion. So I'll just put that disclaimer out there. In terms of webinars, we're going to take 2 weeks off. I'm actually going to the MTNA conference in Minneapolis. This is a wonderful pedagogical gathering that the US puts on. It's the equivalent to the CFMTA that we have here in Canada, the Registered Music Teachers in Canada. The equivalent is the MTNA in the US. And there are sometimes upwards of 2,000 participants that come take in many sessions, recitals, huge trade show floor. That's what I'm most interested this time. And so I've always said, because I'm fairly close, I'm only it's a 6-hour drive for a lot of you. That probably doesn't sound close, but in Canada, that's close. And so I've always said I would go to this if it were held in Minneapolis. So that's what I'll be doing starting a week from today, Friday. I'll be there for a full week, coming back. So we're going to take the next 2 weeks off. We'll call it the March break. But on Friday, March 28th, we're going to have Dr. Erin Parks back from the Lotus Institute in Ottawa. She has spoken to us 3 times now. And this is the 4th in her series on looking at teaching students in the studio, students with exceptionalities. In this particular session, she's going to focus on teaching students with learning disabilities. Look back at the replays on the YouTube channel if you want to see her other sessions. They're very informative. They're very research-based. She's very knowledgeable in that she has taught and has a team of people that teach students piano in this kind of environment, students with learning exceptionalities. And I think you'll find her stuff really worthwhile. It's one of the things that I'm noticing in my studios, the number of students that I'm seeing certainly have more exceptionalities than there had been before. Very quickly, the June exam deadline's coming up next Friday, a week from today. Friday, March 14th is the deadline for students to register if they want an in-person exam through the month of June. And in some cases, some centers, that's as early as May 26th. All throughout the month of June, we're looking at 20 centers that we're targeting. Will we actually hear exams in all 20 centers? Probably pretty close. I imagine there may be a couple centers, though, where the numbers aren't going to be sufficient enough to have a venue and an examiner, etc. And thanks to the number of you who have reached out to do some advanced planning on that, that's really what we rely on now, because well over 60% of students prefer the online option. And so that's what we're more catering to, but we're happy to keep these in-person exams alive wherever we can. So just note the deadline for that next Friday. And then I'll talk about Mosaics for 5. You can see the Mosaic series behind me. You can see that we're up to grade 4. And I presented on that. Elaine Keeler came on last Friday and gave us a really good session on some of the classical era repertoire that she likes from 1 to 4 and demonstrated from her forte piano, which was really insightful. We got all sorts of neat ideas. So check that out. We're working on grade 5 now. I have finished editing all the drafts of grade 5. And now the Harbridge team is working on getting the layouts for that in the next couple of weeks. And I expect to have a layout to start proofing before the end of March. So I would say 3 to 4 weeks, you should be able to purchase grade 5. And it's a wonderful volume. Lots of music, lots of representation from different aspects of music and composers we've never heard of before, including the women composers, BIPOC composers. I think you'll really like that album. I know I really do. The further we go, each one successively impresses me more and more. And so we can look forward to that. And I'll go through a session at the beginning of April with that. Okay, so to frame our discussion today, and a discussion that, I want to do a little bit more listening than talking. I'll talk a lot up front, but I'm quite open to hearing what you all have to say, those of you that have joined me here live. In terms of, what we're seeing in our studios, in terms of Conservatory Canada, what we're seeing that students that are doing a grade 1 exam, for example, are suddenly much less in number. And so we're trying to get to the bottom of that. We've seen this trend for a couple of years. After having a bump up in 2022 in those numbers are starting to fall down slightly again. And that sort of jives with what I'm seeing in my teaching studio and what I'm hearing from a few of you that regularly email to chat about things or to ask questions about pedagogy, teaching. Conservatory Canada, we're here to help. And so I do hear from a number of you regularly, and that keeps my finger on the pulse a little bit, but I wanted to open this up to a larger group just to say, has there been any change in maybe parenting attitudes? Has there been any changes that you're detecting in terms of what you can do with students, what they're capable of at age 6, 7, 8 when they first come into your studio? Has that changed at all? Have you had to alter your methods? How do exams fit into all of this? How do digital badges fit into all of this? And I hope to just talk about digital badges at the end, just to give us an alternative and to refresh everyone's memory on what that's about. And then how does that fit into the exam? Perhaps I'm not too concerned about that today. I just want to more hear from you and see what you're feeling and what you're sensing out there as you navigate the changing times. And they sure are changing in many ways, is my sense. So, like I said, I've taken on a number of beginners myself lately over the past 1.5 to 2 years, and a bunch more this year. And I'd say about half seem to be able to survive using my older methods, which I had revised in 2010 quite a bit, because I'd noticed a change around that time where people wanted things a little bit more recreational pace. And it was around that time that cell phones became pretty much mandatory for high school students. In 2008, we noticed a big difference in our exam numbers at the conservatory. And I noticed a big difference in my home studio in that year, where all of a sudden the practice time dropped off considerably. And then by 2010, I found some ways to incorporate more improv and things like that for students to make it more fun, to get their ears open. Their ears seem to be a lot more open than they were before and not so interested in reading the music. And then I'd say in the last couple of years, I've had to change again, where I'm starting to see beginners that just don't survive in my method that I tend to use, where we're also reading, but we're also learning by rote and improvising and that kind of thing, and using different games and such. I have some students that just aren't capable of pulling off the reading thing. And I also have some students that can't pull off the rote learning thing very easily either. And so that's really got my attention. And then I'm also noticing perhaps a change in parents' attitudes a little bit toward practicing, where it's not quite totally unschooled, although I certainly have a couple of families that fit into that boat, where the students are in charge of their learning. The students are in charge of what and when and in what quantities they want to learn and that kind of thing. I'm just finding that a little bit more common. And, certain old-fashioned traditional discipline has certainly changed a lot. And so I'm just wondering, and some of you may be parents, I'm not a parent, so I don't know how these things kind of operate. And when we only see these students for 30 minutes at a time, I'm finding it's taking me sometimes 30 lessons before I really understand what's going on and how I can fit in, because the communication between parent and teacher is kind of missing, even though they're way more apt to sit in on the lessons now. They just expect that, and that's fine. They don't seem to know what to say or what questions to ask. They just think everything's wonderful and congratulate the student on whatever work gets done that day, even if it isn't very good, and on we go. So That's kind of where I'm coming from. Now, just to clarify those in the chat here, no, we're not seeing each other. This isn't a Zoom meeting, so everyone is still hidden. So you have some anonymity. I've learned that most of you prefer that anonymity in some of these meetings. And so I'm quite happy. That's the first time we did this, we did use Zoom meeting where we could all see each other. I'm happy to do a session like that that's not recorded on YouTube. Reach out to me anytime. Those of you that are watching this live stream after the fact on replay, if you prefer that, let me know. And I can certainly organize another session like this where we can actually see each other. So in this one, folks, those of you here in the Zoom room with me, use the raise your hand feature or just in the chat box. If you can't find the raise your hand feature, because things have changed a bit in these Zoom platforms, just come on and I can take your mute off so that you're allowed to talk and we can start the discussion that way. Is there anyone feeling brave enough to want to share what they're going through, if they have any questions, and if they want to get beyond me seeing? Okay, Kim, you are allowed to unmute your mic now. And once you unmute your mic, you're on. Go ahead. Kim, are you there? Hey, Kim, I see that you're unmuted, but not getting any audio coming our way yet from your microphone. Not sure why.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. You're on. Sure. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting something like this because I've been wondering what's been going on for the past couple of years. I've been teaching probably about now close to 40 years. And this last couple of years, I've really noticed a drop off in my studio, which is okay because I'm getting older and, not wanting to have, teaching 6 days a week. What I'm really finding right now is that students are not disciplined enough to do the practice. And so sometimes I had students being able to do 2 exams a year, and especially once Zoom came in, that they could do these exams by Zoom, that they were really accelerating. But even some of my students that are, in high school that say they get really great marks in high school, they're not disciplined. Like,
Yeah.
if they're doing one half of a grade 7, I'm kind of worried that they're not going to get the other half in time before they lose that. And parents just don't seem to be understanding that yes, their child wanted to take music and they've got this far, but there still needs to be some kind of parental supervision that, hey, have you done your practice for the day? And I'm finding a lot of students quit. Or I just want to play for fun. And I'm not that kind of teacher. I'm a teacher that, you know what, you're going to get these exams done because it moves you along. It gives you evaluation by an outside source that tells you if you're ready to advance to the next grade or if you still have skills that you've got to improve upon before you actually move to the next grade. So I've really found this very, very challenging. And this year I had 2 new students and they quit. They quit within a few lessons because they just couldn't handle my expectations, which were, could you practice a little bit each week? So yeah, I've really found it changing, and I find it very disappointing for me, for all the work I've put into being a really good teacher with a strong reputation. I'm really finding it disappointing that we're not having those kinds of students come into our studio, or into my studio anyway, that want to participate in festival recitals, do exams. So that's my take on this.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Yeah, I totally hear you. I see the same thing. I know festival is an interesting thing too, because we saw those numbers fall off a lot earlier, many years ago. And so all the festivals in the say medium-sized to small-sized centers certainly have lost numbers for the most part, from what I can tell. And the quality from the adjudicating that I get out into, usually every 2 years, I'm out doing a couple of festivals in different parts of the country. And the quality of the playing there, yeah, we've had to really dial back on, I feel bad handing out first, second, third place because in most of those classes, that's not what they're there for. They're obviously not, maybe they are, but the quality that comes out in the playing is certainly not what we were used to. And yeah, I'm really curious about the parenting because you talk about that too, and thinking about, how have the attitudes changed? Because I find that the parents aren't really able to articulate what they're trying to get across in their parenting, or if they realize that they don't seem to realize that something like music lessons, let's say piano, specifically violin, I'm sure would be the same, where there's a lot that goes into it, and it maybe doesn't have to be a discipline, but the students that have some kind of parental backing, where the parent is somewhat interested, even the littlest bit, in what the student's doing in the lessons, that the week to week progress kind of starts to take care of itself. And I still have a few families like that. I'm grateful for that. But by and large, that's fallen by the wayside. So I'm wondering if you or anyone has any thoughts about what you think has changed in terms of those parenting attitudes and why. And anyone else wants to chat here, just raise your hand. But yeah, go ahead, Kim. You're still unmuted. You can let us know.
Okay. So what I've seen with parenting is that music is not like the sports. And I see most of my students gravitating towards sports because hockey practice or games are like 2 times a week. And what do they do in between? Nothing, right? Whereas as piano teachers, we're expecting them to do a little bit of work each day. And because we're not with them every single day, we can't tell them, sit down and let's hear some practice. So what I'm seeing in parenting is that their parents are busy, and they over involve their kids in way too much stuff. And so, I don't know, because kids are not that expressive about how they're really feeling. They're not really feeling frustrated or whatever. They can't tell me that. But I'm seeing that parents just put them into way too much stuff, and they have
Okay, we just
way,
go ahead.
higher expectations that everything turned out, or they're choosing which stuff things they want to do.
Yeah, yeah. And they have free choice, which is good. Okay, so overscheduled is the one word that popped out at me there too, what you're saying, where students have lots of things on the go all the time. They have to be busy, but you're also saying that these things that they're busy in all the time, they're filling time, but there's no expectation in between the activity. Whereas as teachers with music, we expect or we require this kind of daily practice to take place. And if it doesn't take place, there's no progress. And perhaps they're frustrated by that lack of progress. And so a lot of them quit. So it's an interesting thing, and I've grappled with this as well lately, where I've got a couple of families where clearly they're just not going to be able to manage the daily practice, and so previously I would say, okay, well then this isn't suited to you, and they have to find another teacher or concentrate on their other activities, where it's going to be difficult to teach them. And so I'm trying to find a way to say, okay, can I create a musical experience where they don't have to practice weekly? And I've got a couple of families, and it's sort of working, but it's just the long term is not going to be there for them. This is a transient thing. I'll probably get through this year with them, and I don't know whether they'd be back next year or not. So it's really tough to say, and to see us have to go to that level where we have to. I feel like sometimes I have to figure out how to teach through the year where I know there's not going to be anything happening in between lessons. So you throw out your method book, you start learning rote exercises and hope they remember things week to week. And in the middle of the lesson, you're wondering, what's the parent thinking here? Because we're doing the same things week after week, and there isn't any real progression. And from what I hear from these families is they talk about stopping lessons, but then the students have meltdowns. And so this is why they keep coming to the lesson. So anyway,
Can you still hear me?
yeah, go ahead, Kim. Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing I'm finding is time management. And you're right about the iPhones and things like that. I'm just telling my students, sit down before you go to school for 5 minutes and do 3 scales, or get through the first 2 lines of, your group one piece. And they really find that hard, and I'm, right now I'm having a difficult time with some of my students that want to go on to be medical doctors or professionals in disciplines that really are going to take a lot of discipline to get through those degrees to get into that profession. And I'm trying to teach them that, it's not going to happen 2 days before you do the exam. It's a little bit every single day. And if you can get yourself into that disciplinary habit of getting a little bit done each day, you're going to see progress. But that's really, really hard to teach them. That time management skill is beyond them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Okay, so we've got it in the chat box here. I'll keep everyone anonymous here. I mean, and those of us here can see who's talking, but I'll just keep this anonymous. So this teacher has lots of students who don't work that hard, but are happy to work on 1 or 2 pieces at a time and prepare something for a recital twice a year. And they have a bunch of teenagers who've been with them for a long time who are happy just to work at that level. And you're happy with that. Okay, that's good to hear that, you have found a way with your high school students, it sounds like. And I know I always have a bunch of high school students around too. And sometimes they want to work toward an exam, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, by and large, they're only learning 4 or 5 pieces by the end of the year, and they're able to perform well in the recital. We don't necessarily move up a level from there every year, but it's, they seem to enjoy it, and we're able to pass on some skills in that time, and we have to be okay with that. And so I can totally relate to that. Okay, so we've talked about overschedule. Oh, the survey. So it was last year, first time since 2021, we put out a teacher survey just to gauge some of these sentiments. And I thought I would just give you some of the facts that came out of that, because we're well over 100 of you, almost 200 of you filled out that survey, and we're grateful for that. And in the survey data, we asked very explicit questions about exams so we could, work on our business model as well and figure out what's happening, across the country in different regions and things. And by and large, it was very similar to the 2021 data, but way more focused now, where you're reporting that the reason students don't do exams so much anymore is because the parents don't really require it or want it. And then you also highlighted that students don't have enough practice time to do it, et cetera, and that maybe only 5% on average of your students you're able to submit for exams to the point where you feel comfortable with that. So that was one really interesting, fact that came out of the data there from the survey. And again, we thank you for all of that. You gave us all sorts of other wonderful feedback too about changing attitudes out there, how you're meeting the needs of students and that kind of thing. How does Conservatory Canada fit into that? And so we're working to try and sculpt some kind of coherent message out of that. And one of the things we did was to create the digital badges a couple of years ago, where instead of students learning 4 or 5 pieces for an exam, plus all of this technique and skills, which they don't seem quite so interested in, all they have to do for a digital badge is prepare 3 pieces and pre-record them at whatever level they're at. We give you complete control over the repertoire. You share the links with us. The fee is only about 1/3 of an exam, and we can give them very detailed feedback so that they feel part of a process. And we give them gold, silver, or bronze standing so that there's still something to work toward. And I know when I do this with my students lately, what I'm amazed right from the start when we started this program was just how invested they became in the process of recording something on video on my computer. We watch it back, and now all of a sudden they're not happy with it, and they see more clearly, and they want to do it again and again, and there's more practicing takes place. So I found with digital badges, that's the way I've gone more, simply because there's more practicing in between. The goal is much more immediate. It's right there in their face. They're not preparing for something that's so far in the future. And even for them, 4 weeks in the future feels like an eternity. And you can see things aren't going to go well on an exam when you've registered for it. It's still 4 weeks. They're still not even cramming yet at that point. But with the digital badge, is really focused. You can work on one piece at a time, submit all 3 when they're ready, and they can get some feedback. And they seem to like that, and it sucks them in a little bit differently. And I've been able to use that to create better practice habits in between. Because if they don't, now they see the feedback right away when they're the ones that watch the recording they've created. And they have to work through that frustration. And the whole lesson is driven around trying to get a solid recording. And then we can talk about why things aren't working out. And then they can make changes and move on. It's a really great thing. I encourage more of you to consider trying that. The other thing we're doing with the digital badges on the website, I'm going to post frequently asked questions, an FAQ, in the digital badge page pretty soon in the next week here, so that you can maybe get a little better idea about some of the intricacies about how that worked. In our teacher survey last year, most of you mentioned that you hadn't had a chance to really consider the digital badges yet, or what they were about or how they worked. And so that's something that we want to help you with so that you can have another tool in your toolbox. I also noticed it's really good for students that, you'd like them to play in the music festival perhaps, which, I don't support so much myself anymore, but because I just don't see my students surviving in that environment. But those students, you want to have that kind of experience, but they're not going to be able to be ready, or they're not going to handle the pressure that might come with that kind of experience. The digital badges really fit the bill nice because they get detailed feedback. The examiner, when we listen to those, we do listen to the recording multiple times so that we can get the assessment right. In a festival situation, that's really hard for an adjudicator who's adjudicating all day to make sure they're hearing everything really clearly. So sometimes it's a little bit vague. Sorry, I'm going to turn up my mic here. Thanks for the feedback on my voice sound there, my level. Hopefully that's a little bit better for you. Okay, anyone else now? Who else wants to come on and share their experience, or maybe you have a question, or maybe you're willing to talk about either the frustration or the success that you're having with some of the changes? Well, so just use the raise your hand feature, or just type into the chat box that you'd like to come on, and I can unmute your microphone here. Anybody else? And Kim, thanks for your thoughts. I know you're always very free with your thoughts by email for me as well, so that I know what's going on in your studio. Nobody, okay, so what I think we're gonna do at this point, it's a bit of a shorter session. But I'm sensing maybe what we'll do is we'll stop the YouTube live stream at that. And like I said, if any of you are watching after the fact and you'd like to dive into this topic a little bit more, but maybe not so much in a public forum, let me know and I'll organize a meeting that's in a different format that's not so public. And then what we'll do is we'll continue on with those of you here with me in the Zoom room right now off camera, and we'll see how that goes. So everyone, thanks for joining today on this little webinar, short session, but an important question that we want to ask and get some feedback on and talk about. And join me on March 28th, 3 weeks from today,